Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and you are all members of this jury, because there are those of you who claim that Jesus never had a fair trial, that Jesus never had a chance, we have called you together to hear the story of Jesus and declare a verdict. Jesus was originally tried and condemned by his own religious leaders. Jesus admitted to believing himself to be the Christ, the Son of God, and he was called a blasphemer. There is talk that Jesus bore the sins of humanity for us. Some believe that as the Son of God, he came to satisfy God's justice, to suffer and die, so that those who believe in him will be spared punishment for their own sins. Esteemed jury members, these claims will be for you to decide. Did Jesus get a fair trial, or was his death unwarranted? Court is in session. Today, I call our second witness to the stand, Mary. Do you swear? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Would you tell the jury who you are and how you know Jesus?
My name is Mary, and I gave birth to Jesus.
I understand that there's quite a story that goes with that simple statement. Tell us about that.
Well, I was living in Nazareth in Galilee with my family, and I was just a teenager, and I was out doing the day's chores when suddenly an angel appeared. I was terrified. The angel introduced himself as Gabriel and told me not to be afraid. Have you ever seen an angel? Don't be afraid. That's easier said than done. Gabriel told me that I was favored by God.
And what did the angel mean by that?
That I had been chosen by God for a special assignment to give birth to the Messiah. The Messiah's birth had been prophesied for centuries, but now the angel was telling me that I was to be his mother. You know, that seemed so incredible because I was a virgin. I was engaged to Joseph, but had never had sex. How was I supposed to have a baby?
That does seem incredible.
Gabriel said it would be by the power of the Holy Spirit that I would have this baby. And he went on to say that I should name this son, my son, Jesus.
Tell us about your background. Are you the daughter of someone well-known?
Not at all. I am just a common person, no one special. My family line descended from King David of Israel, but he lived centuries ago. I've never been rich, I've never been powerful, just a common face in the crowd. My family, and then Joseph and I, we always worked hard to keep a roof over our head and put food on the table. Nothing about that ever changed. My husband Joseph was a carpenter. Now, we weren't destitute, but our lifestyle was very simple.
So you raised Jesus in Nazareth?
Well, eventually, but he was born in Bethlehem. Joseph and I were both from the lineage of David, and the Roman government wanted a census while I was pregnant. We had to travel to our ancestry town of Bethlehem, about 80 miles from Nazareth. I thought I was going to die making that trip. It took about a week to get there, and I was days from giving birth. We barely made it into Bethlehem before I went into labor, and Joseph was scrambling to get us a quiet place to bed down. The inns were full. So Jesus was born in a stable.
That doesn't sound like the ideal situation.
I was so scared. It was just Joseph and me. I wanted my mother there so badly. Having a baby was so painful and such hard work. I was exhausted, and Joseph, he was exhausted too. After Jesus was born, we were trying to get some rest. And then suddenly this group of shepherds showed up. They said they had been visited by angels who told them that the Messiah had been born. Wow. They were over the top excited, and they said they were going to tell everybody. Our quiet recovery time didn't last very long. And later, some wise men came to visit us, saying that they had followed a sign, a star in the sky. But first they had gone to Herod's palace to ask him where the new king had been born. You know, they had planned to return to Herod and let him know where they found us. But before they left, they were warned in a dream that Herod wanted to harm Jesus. So they decided to go home by a different route.
So Jesus was kept safe then?
Yes, because Joseph also had a message from God. He was given a dream that we needed to flee to Egypt so that Herod wouldn't find us. We spent the first part of Jesus' life in Egypt before returning to Nazareth.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's jump ahead to Jesus' ministry. Were you part of his traveling crew?
Well, for the most part, no. But once in a while, we would connect with Jesus and his disciples. One of the first times that Jesus and I were together was at a wedding in Cana. The bride and the groom ran out of wine. That was a terrible faux pas, and I thought Jesus would be able to do something about that. But I never anticipated what he really ended up doing.
His solution was unexpected?
It sure was. He changed water into wine. The guests remarked that it was the best wine they'd ever had.
That does sound miraculous.
You know, Jesus was able to do many miracles. He could heal people. He created this big feast for a huge crowd, and he only had a couple of loaves of bread and a couple of fish to start with. The disciples even told me that at one point he walked on water.
Tell us about Jesus' final weeks before his crucifixion.
Well, Jesus had decided to go to Jerusalem to observe the Passover, and word spread that he was coming. He had quite a following, and people lined the streets, and they spread out palm branches, and they even put their cloaks on the road.
Jesus was obviously quite popular.
Well, yes and no. Lots of common people followed him, but the Jewish religious leaders, they never had anything good to say about him. And they saw this impromptu parade, and apparently they decided they had to get rid of him. The week went downhill from there.
Tell us what happened.
Well, Jesus was spending a lot of time with his disciples. Some other women and I were making sure that they had meals and places to sleep, because Jerusalem was always so busy at Passover time. The disciples and Jesus ate the Passover meal in the upper room, and then Jesus, he took his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus would often go there when he was in Jerusalem for a quiet time of prayer.
And you were with the group in the garden?
No, I wasn't there. But before the evening was over, someone came busting in where we were at to let me know that Jesus had been arrested. My heart was in my throat. Arrested for what? Well, come to find out, the Jewish leaders had sent soldiers to arrest Jesus. And then these religious leaders put Jesus on trial in the middle of the night. I think they had already decided to find him guilty. Someone came rushing out saying that these men wanted Jesus killed.
And did they have the power to do that?
No, I don't think so, because they sent him to stand trial before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And Pilate didn't seem to want to give Jesus the death penalty. He sent Jesus to stand trial before Herod, who sent him back to Pilate, and Pilate ordered Jesus to be flogged. Oh, it was terrible. The flogging alone almost killed him. He was bleeding so bad. And the soldiers, they had to hold him up because he couldn't even stand. Pilate wanted to release Jesus, but the crowd was calling for his crucifixion. Now, Pilate had the habit of releasing one prisoner at the time of Passover, and Pilate suggested that Jesus could be released. But the crowd was yelling for Barabbas instead. I didn't understand that because Barabbas, he was this notorious criminal. I couldn't believe that these people wanted him released instead of Jesus. What had my son done to deserve a death sentence?
You were there when Jesus was crucified?
Oh, it was horrible, a horrible death. You know, Mary Magdalene and my sister and I, we were at the foot of the cross with John, one of Jesus' disciples. Jesus had already been beaten, and now they were hurling insults at him and gambling for his clothes. Jesus was having obvious trouble breathing because he kept trying to push himself more upright on the cross. But they had nailed him through his hands and his feet, and he was in agony. I thought my heart was surely breaking. There was nothing I could do to help Jesus, only stand and watch him suffer. Yet at one point, Jesus looked me straight in the eye, and he commended me to the care of his beloved disciple John. My husband had died earlier, and so John took care of me after that day.
Did anyone come to Jesus' rescue?
Not while he was alive. But Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus' body off the cross and put him in a new tomb. Us women who had been at the cross went along to prepare Jesus' body for burial. But we couldn't complete the process because the time of Passover was on top of us. We decided that we would come back on Sunday and finish the preparation. You know, the world was so dark on that Friday. Jesus had given so many people hope, but it seemed that hope had died with him on that cross. On Saturday, we could hardly look at one another, much less talk. We were all in shock. I couldn't stop crying.
Did you stay in Jerusalem long after Jesus was crucified?
Well, on Sunday, a small group of us women were going to go back to the tomb to finish the burial rite for Jesus. But when we got there, the tomb was empty. We were confused and scared. But while we were talking about what might have happened, two men in dazzling clothes, they must have been angels, appeared and told us that Jesus had risen. Risen? We knew that Jesus had been fully dead on Friday. There was no question about that. But now, Jesus was risen. It was a miracle. We ran back to where the disciples were gathered, and we told them the news.
Jesus was risen, alive and well?
Yes. He appeared many times after he arose to the disciples. Many were with him when he ascended into heaven. I was with the disciples immediately after Jesus went to heaven, and we were praying about who was going to take Judas's place as a disciple.
Mary, as Jesus' mother, you have a completely unique perspective on this whole affair. What would you want this jury to understand about Jesus?
You know, when Jesus was just a tiny baby, and Joseph and I took him to the temple to be presented to the Lord, an old man there by the name of Simeon prophesied about Jesus, saying that he would be bringing salvation for Jews and Gentiles alike. Joseph and I discussed what that might have meant after we left the temple and decided that maybe God was finally going to bring freedom for the nation of Israel. I really didn't understand until after Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected from the dead that the salvation that had been prophesied was for the total forgiveness of our sins, of everybody's sins. Simeon told me that day in the temple that a sword would pierce my heart as well. I've thought about that for a long time. I can't even begin to tell you how hard it has been to watch everything that Jesus had gone through. There was a time I thought that the Jewish people were going to crown Jesus their king, that he would set us free for the oppression from Rome. But instead, he died on a Roman cross. The only way I got through all of this was through the strength of God. I believe that God sent his angels to protect me. God's plan of salvation was totally different than what we thought it would be. Jesus became the sacrificial lamb, sacrificed for our sin. But I think it's important as well that we pay attention to how Jesus lived his life while here on earth. He loved people, all people. He was criticized for hanging out with the wrong people. But Jesus wanted everyone to know how precious each person is to God the Father. Jesus preached truth. He healed those who were hurting. He chastised those who made it difficult for people to have a relationship with God. I believe that Jesus shows us the heart of God.
Thank you. Jury, you have heard the testimony of this key witness. Our next witness will be Thomas, known by many as the doubting disciple. You are instructed to reflect on Mary's words, asking yourself if Jesus got a fair trial. Until our next witness appears, this court is in recess.